everyone, so video on how to install the pod and the universal adapter onto your mast. It might sound simple initially, and it is, but there are two fundamental, quite important things to remember and do to make sure that it's an easy process. So what you're going to need to do is have your injection molded pods from your kit and your universal adapter parts ready to go. You also need to have the pod bolts and your 2.5mm driver to put it all together. So over here I've got a unifoil mast, and over here I've got an Armstrong mast. The reason I've got two different masts is, despite they look reasonably similar, they are actually really different shapes. So this is quite a thick, extremely strong mast, but it has a continuous taper on the trailing edge back this way, and the Armstrong mast sort of has a taper coming in both on the rear and the front, sort of coming out to quite a wide base. And same thing here, this is coming out to an even wider base. So these are two great masts to demonstrate why the universal pod adapter is fantastic, because you can fit any of this equipment to either parts of these masts without problem. So what you want to do is work out which of the nose cones you're going to need for the area of the mast you want to fit it to. Luckily there's only two choices, long or short. So what you want to do is get the nose, there's no direction, just slide it in, and then you want to make sure that the little cylindrical parts key into the printed part. So there they're fitted, they look like that. And then you put the rear in. Again, there's no right or wrong way, they just slot in. This is probably the one thing you want to make sure you get right. Don't try and just find a random spot and just jam the screws in. It's the hardest way to do it. First of all, you want to find what's the appropriate key for the location you want to fit it onto the mast. So if I was trying to fit it, let's pick the 800 number here on this unifoil mast. I know that the short's not going to be the right one, because when I put the pod halves together, there's an enormous gap. So I'm going to take that off and put it aside. The long one, if I put that on and I put it together, there's an enormous gap in the front of the mast, and that's not going to work because it's not going to be secure. So it comes down to trying some different keys. You can put the keys in with this still in the nose, but I find it easier to just take it out, select a key, slide it in like that. And you only need to pull it apart slightly to do that. Back in the pod. I'm going to put that over the nose like that and put the rear on, remembering that you want to have the rectangle opening facing down. Put that on like that. So I've, by chance, picked a key that to me looks great, looks like it's going to fit. But because I can push these two halves together without using the compression of the bolts, I'm suspect of it, it's probably not going to be stiff enough. And if I was to push this together and wiggle it, see how there's too much play there? So what I actually need to do is take this out, and I'm going to go up one key to the next size up. So this is a 20. They go up in 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30mm increments. I'm going to put that back together. I'm going to slide that on. And now I can see that I've got a gap between the rear and the nose. If I was to push that in, and if I tried to push that in by hand, it's quite hard. That's actually what I want, because these are malleable parts. You want to use the 4 bolts to compress the nose and the rear of the pod together and pull everything in together, so it's quite a tight fit. If you ever are reaching for the 30mm key, that is the point where you need to think, I probably should start looking at using the short nose cone. I could technically use the long nose cone with the 30 and still fit it in the same position, but you're always better off using the smallest pod. So if you ever find yourself reaching for the 30, just try using the short nose cone with 0 keys, and you'll find that it's basically the same crossover point. Now this is where the next step becomes important. Trying to align These pod halves, in the position they're in now, very difficult on a very wide mast. So this is quite a thick mast because it's incredibly strong, but it does have the impact of when I put the pod on here, it wants to open the pod halves up. So it's forcing it open like that, which means the bolt holes in this don't align with the inserts in the pod. They sort of open up like that. So the easiest way around that, if I put the bolts in to the rear of my pod, the simplest way to do this is to actually take the pod and drag it right up the top, put the two pods together, and then I'm just going to start each bolt. So I'm not doing them all the way up, just to get the threads to start. So I can now pull the pod down to the position I want it, over the 800, and the pod isn't splaying out because the bolts are preventing it from doing that. And now I can simply tighten everything up, as you would expect, and the injection molded outer solid parts will compress the inner squishy rubber type parts as you'd expect. Now, you're going to find that you have to do these bolts up evenly to sort of go around in a uniform fashion. You don't want to do one bolt completely all the way up first and leave the other three undone, because it's going to be uneven. So try and do them evenly, well, as evenly as you can manage, and pull them all together. So I've now successfully mounted this pod at that position on the mast, and it's really stiff. By the time you then install your motor, put your rubber guide on there and apply your tape, which is another anchoring point, this mast's not going anywhere. Super tight, super well compressed. You'll notice I've already got another pod on here, which is in the slam position, really, really low down, for probably a 15 centimeter. And all I've done is I've used the same nose cone, but I've used the 10mm key. So find the right key, find the right position, slide it up to the top, pre-start the bolts at least a few mils, let's say 2 or 3 millimeters of thread in each, slide it down, then tighten it up. Every mast's different, so this has a very different shape to the Armstrong. When you tighten it up, it is not unusual if you find that the key is, in this case, it's about 1 millimeter proud of the inner part, which is totally fine. That's just everything compressing and getting squished into its position. This will look slightly different to something that's on this mast. On the case of an aluminium where it's symmetrical, it's going to look slightly different. So it's completely normal to have the occasional little bump, or it looks like it's slightly proud on this. So the shape here is slightly different to where it needs to be here. As masts start to splay out, the universal adapter is having to do more deformation to take up that shape, if that makes sense. So if you're traveling with this stuff or you're storing it, common sense, but you don't want to like put this underneath a board and squish it in a board bag and having it sitting there for 2 weeks all squished up. If you're going to store them in the actual plastic part if you're not using them. And if you are using them, and I was traveling, I would take this rear and nose off and just simply bolt it back together and keep the parts supported. It just prevents them from getting crushed and deformed over time. I think that's it. It's pretty straightforward. If you've got any questions, reach out to support staff at fourwheeldrive.com and we can help you. But if you follow those steps, you shouldn't have any trouble. Cheers.